My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. I get what I want, I'm in it to win it. For what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. No more.
Since when can you talk? Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden and today we're going to talk about love. Well, sort of. Today we're going to be talking about something that's been going on for a while in the Batman series. And it is spoilery, so if you aren't caught up on the Batman comics, you've been warned. But this plot point's been out for a while now, and at a certain point I don't care. We're going to talk about this. Batman and Catwoman are getting married. Whoa! Crazy, I know. And I have some complicated thoughts on the matter, so I want to get into it a little bit. To do that, we're going to look at the history of Catwoman and Batman together, and what they mean to each other, and what Catwoman's role has been in Batman's story. She is, after all, the Batman character. To that end, let's get ready for another deep dive into these two and what they mean for each other. Enjoy! It's important to remember Catwoman was an early creation in Batman history, premiering in spring 1940, only a year after Batman was created. Appearing in the first issue of Batman's solo series outside of the Detective comic run, even. Her creation was a mix of Bob Kane and Bill Finger's desire to give this new comic a certain sense of sex appeal, while also having a character different from other Batman villains of this early era. Selina Kyle was designed not to be a killer nor necessarily evil, but a real challenge and potential enemy to Batman. So her history and design at its most basic origins has actually been pretty straightforward in that regard. Catwoman from the ground up was designed to be the odd villain out within Batman's rogues gallery, because she's always meant to have been this different character. She's not really crazy, she does actually care about people around her, and she was always a potential love interest to Bruce Wayne. That being said, in actual execution, well, over the years, Selina's Kyle kind of went all over the place. Early on, Selina very much did straddle the role of a villain and love interest and very heavily relied on the femme fatale archetype, to the point of almost being a cliché, even for the time period that these comics were being published in. Then the Comics Code Authority slipped into the industry, and concerns about her violating the code's strict rules on how women are depicted, she all but disappeared for an entire decade until the late 60s. Then she started to reappear both in the comics and the Adam West TV show, and it was during this era that Catwoman began to most resemble the classic version of the villain we think of from this era. It's here that she really started to cement her place as part of Batman's rogues gallery. The show in particular kind of went into this over-the-top version of the character, as they did with pretty much every Batman villain at the time. She became obsessed with all things cats, and was given motivations and behaviors a little more complicated than any of the other villains. She often seemed interested in seducing Batman, which did kind of make her unique, but that was mostly focused on her using him to her own ends, while Batman would mostly reject her on the grounds that she was a villain and there really wasn't enough room in the bed for both her and Robin. In the comics, we also got our first real take of Batman and Catwoman getting married through the creation of Earth 2, where the two had a child named Helena Wayne who would one day become the superhero known as the Huntress. By now, the Comics Code Authority was already a part of history, and we got to see a more adult take on Batman and associated characters. In doing so, we started to really dive into Catwoman's backstory, and here's where things go all over the place. Through stories like Batman Year One, Catwoman solo comics, and Batman Dark Victory, we started getting information about her really inconsistent manner. Year One shows us Selina breaking away from her abusive pimp and beginning to train out of fear for her sister. It's a little awkward, but I do like Year One, and I kind of like this take on Catwoman, that she had this dark past, and, we shy away from sex workers and stuff like that, but they're a part of our world, and it was interesting making her character have that past. But I do get why people are uncomfortable with that, and what it might say about Selina's character not exactly being great for the average DC fan, per se. I understand how people have complicated reactions to this, to say the least. Meanwhile, Dark Victory implies Selina might be the illegitimate daughter of mob boss Carmine Falcone, and that's a whole other interesting thing, but that might not be the case anymore. It's really hard to pin down what is and isn't true of Catwoman these days. In all of this, Batman's relationship with Catwoman varied quite wildly. Sometimes they were close, enemies, but also sometimes more, and even occasional allies, if not just outright allies. Other times there would be little relationship between them at all. They got really close during the Long Halloween, only for Batman to reject her twice, and the relationship sort of falls apart there. As I recall it, it was pretty much one of those moments of, oh, I can't work, we're from different worlds, tragic, Batman angst, and so on and so forth. I like the Long Halloween, but looking back on it, it does feel like they just didn't get together because of superhero cliché. Selina is also one of the few who recognizes Batman is not Batman when Azrael briefly takes his place. From here, the two grow apart, only working together on occasion, while Selina started to do her own thing as she got her own solo series. Things kinda got weird from there in typical comic book fashion. Catwoman learns she was mind-controlled into acting more as a hero, pushing her into murdering Black Mask after he starts torturing Selina's sister, while she becomes a mother after the events of Infinite Crisis, only to eventually give the girl up for adoption. It is implied the father of this girl, named Helena, might be Bruce Wayne. All of this confusion was mostly put to the side, maybe for the best, in the New 52 era, although the idea of Bruce being married with a child on Earth 2 was carried over. That's where the Earth 2 Helena Wayne comes from. Catwoman's personality is more or less intact, although the origins drew from the movie Batman Returns for whatever reason. And in the midst of the New 52, Selina took over a crime family and gained quite a bit of power, while Batman had a pretty complicated relationship with her, to say the least. That takes us to Rebirth. Selina worked with Batman but quite a bit over the last year's worth of comics, and she's revealed to have taken the fall for her friend Holly Robinson, who murdered hundreds and hundreds of people in some crazy revenge scream after they burned down the orphanage those two grew up in. We delve pretty deeply into the relationship between Bruce and Selina as a result of this in the core Batman series of Rebirth, as the series generally establishes what of this long, strange history remains in current canon, and what these two mean to each other. It all comes to a head somewhere around Batman number 24, which after a good 8 issues of build-up, Catwoman actually says yes when Bruce Wayne proposes to her. It's a pretty touching moment, I have to say. It's staged well, it's paced out a little funny, but it was good build-up and kind of feels earned, like these two characters have developed to this spot. I'll get into that more in a second. Right now in the comics, the two are pretty much ready to be married, although in a good summation of their history together, they kick off the budding plans by hunting down Holly Robinson so they can clear Selina's name. That's a whole bunch of random nonsense I've laid out when we look over Catwoman's history, but it's important to review this stuff so we can put this marriage in its proper context. That's a good 75 years of Catwoman history, and yes, it's very much entangled with Bruce Wayne. She's a Batman character. It's not unreasonable for us to look at her that way. It's also important because it highlights my biggest problem with Catwoman, the reason I've never really been a huge fan of her character. One minute she's a femme fatale, another she's a merciless supervillain. In other comics, she's pretty much a superhero like anyone else. And unlike other superheroes who have changed over time, she doesn't really follow any sort of trajectory into a specific direction. She's sporadic and difficult to predict, largely changing based on the whims of whoever's writing her at the time. Part of this is her character. She is unpredictable by nature, but a lot of it really can't be chalked up to anything other than inconsistent writing. In many stories, she comes off as little more than a distraction, a nuisance character who adds little to the story other than the most basic levels of exploitation. This was a big issue I had with the New 52 and this character, and I still find that premiere issue of Catwoman in the New 52 which ends with her and Batman somehow enjoying time together with their costumes on, somehow at the same time endlessly amusing, gross, and confusing, all at once in this weird blur. It's great. It's something else. That particular moment in the character's history, as clumsy and poorly executed as it may be, is actually a decent take on the two characters at the time. It's clear they're just using each other to deal with some frustration in their personal lives. Both of them feel like they were in relative low points, with both Batman and Catwoman dealing with a lot of personal baggage and being increasingly isolated from other people in their lives. At the time, both knew it probably wasn't for the best, but they were doing it anyways. I get that. I can relate to that. At the time, Batman wasn't really trusting other people the way he should have been. That was a big point of Death of the Family, after all. While Catwoman was becoming more powerful and involved in the crime world, and becoming a lot more violent and dangerous because of it. They were both heading in bad directions, and what fleeting romance they had just was a way to not deal with the bigger and darker things in their respective lives. It wasn't the best in terms of writing, but it was something. But things seem to have changed by now in Rebirth. Batman has been starting to open up more and more these days, caring for others and actually relying on them like a real human being. At around issue 9 of Rebirth-era Batman, we learn of Catwoman's false confession concerning Holly's murder spree, and we start to see an interesting side of these two. While Catwoman's made a pretty strong shift from crime lord to someone taking the fall for their friend who's done a series of terrible things. But it's an interesting moment, as Batman doesn't have proof, but he just admits he knows Selina wouldn't do these things. And after a liaison on the roof, followed by Selina saving Batman from Holly after he discovers what Selina really did, Catwoman admits she has feelings for Bruce, just like he cares for her. This is all fine, and the usual sort of back and forth we see between these two over the years. But everything seems to change in the story The Button, something that doesn't even feature Catwoman, but is a strictly pivotal moment in Bruce's character. After he and the Flash are flung into the Flashpoint universe, Bruce comes face to face with that world's Batman, another version of his father, Thomas Wayne. Barry and Bruce would eventually return home, but not before Thomas tells Bruce that he would never want this life for his son, imploring Bruce not to devote his entire life to fighting crime. Now, initially I thought this was going to lead Batman to a classic superhero identity crisis he would ultimately have to overcome and, in a way, discard his father's advice. But I was wrong. It's a smarter take than that. Because as much as Bruce Wayne is Batman, these words do seem to have an impact on him. And I think that's a major reason as to why Bruce wants to marry Selina now. Remember, it's pretty much been Bruce's hang-ups that have consistently been the reason that he and Catwoman have never gotten together. He's chosen this life of solitude and being Batman alone. So, to actively seek a life beyond that is a pretty big deal for him. But if he's going to take any of his father's advice to heart, then maybe he should open up. Maybe he should develop a life beyond just fighting crime. I mean, it seems simple, but to Batman that's a big deal and a rather serious change for the character, but a positive one if you ask me. It's kind of boring to have a character that has virtually no personal life or interest outside of his superhero career, and this could be a very positive change for him. Because I think that's the real lesson of Thomas's words, not to give up on being Batman entirely, but to not wallow in misery over his parents' death, to have something more than that to his life, even if he's done something good with Batman. He can be more. He can be more than one thing. Sure, we've seen this unfold on Earth too, but not like this. Not in the main canon in the world of Rebirth, where all the characters are changing and finding themselves in new situations among fresh ideas and stories. This makes things very exciting, filled with possibility, and for the first time, in a very, very long time, I'm actually looking forward to seeing how Batman and Catwoman's relationship develops. There. I mean, I wouldn't even be against them having a kid together, and that's very interesting. I don't know, Batman's family could grow quite a bit out of all of this. Tom King has made me into a fan of these two, against all odds, and I'm happy about that. I think it's a really good sign of some interesting stories to come, and is why I like Rebirth so much. It changes things, and not in superficial ways. It's presenting real, permanent shifts to these characters that, as far as I can tell, DC is committed to. Superman has a family now. It seems like Batman's going to get a family now. Mara's becoming Aquaman. We're getting shifts in characters. Wally West is back and here to stay. The Green Lanterns have shifted around considerably and have a new setup that I really like. All these changes seem really creative and interesting. I mentioned during Long Halloween how angst-ridden and silly Batman rejecting Catwoman felt then. He couldn't trust her, wasn't willing to make it work, and just couldn't see himself sharing his life, having a life beyond Batman, giving how devoted he is to this one thing. And we've seen how these changes in family dynamics can be really strong. We see it on every page of every Superman comic in the world of Rebirth. The Man of Steel is still the hero we know, but by letting him have this family, we've seen a version of Superman whose priorities have shifted ever so slightly. He still cares about the world and the people around it, but more than anyone, he cares about Lois and John. That's important and has led to countless moments of Superman getting kind of scary very fast, when either of his family members are in danger. He even has this sense of not wanting to sacrifice himself because he doesn't want to leave his family alone in this new world. There's something deep about that I can't quite put my hand on because it hasn't been explored in a lot of other stories. If Batman starts to head in that direction, or really any direction forward, it should be a very different but fun change of pace for the character. It will likely change how Selina and Bruce think, act, and operate, but it will be interesting more than anything else. The dynamic between the Bat family will likely evolve in interesting ways, and we might see Catwoman develop more of a relationship with the people so deeply in Bruce's life. That matters in a big way and is kind of what Rebirth has been about since day one. Good quality stories that actually move the characters forward, maybe not in huge ways every time, but in ways with consequences, lasting effects, and meaningful development. And that's a very good thing. I don't know where things are going from here, and I won't pretend to. I have no idea if this marriage will work, or if the wedding is even going to happen. If Rebirth is any indication, though, it will. They've made a big promise of something kind of big in the history of comics, and it's gonna happen. When we look at the story being told and the character work that's gone into it, that makes sense. It works from what I've read. It's exciting and kind of feels big. And I'm looking forward to it. It's an event, and one that hasn't really happened in the main continuity before. As cheesy as that is, if they follow through with it, as they have so far with every other major change they've lobbed into Rebirth, then I'm excited for it. Catwoman's ambiguous moral code aside, she does care about the people around her and will go out of her way to help others. She and Bruce at this point share a great deal of traits with each other, and they have a lot of similar childhood trauma and history that gave them these deep-seated trust issues that they're going to have to work through together. But both seem to finally be healing at each other's side. Both seem to be better and more honest with each other now, and I find it kind of romantic that they've managed to work past their baggage and found solace in each other. Two ships in the night sort of thing. It's nice. I like to think of it as this. Selina's one of the few people in the world who might share an ideal date with Bruce, mostly consisting of them leaping from roof to roof in Gotham City, fighting crime, having fun together, and just sharing their life with each other. Selina can keep up with Batman, and that matters a great deal. So I think this can work, and that's an exciting, unprecedented moment for Catwoman, and especially Batman, who has always been so guarded with his personal life. This really is one of the only ongoing relationships he has with someone, and I don't know, it just makes sense to me. I am now a fan of this. I like the idea, and I think it's a really good concept and direction for these two iconic characters.
Thank you for watching our video. If you liked it, please consider supporting us on Patreon. You can find a link to our Patreon page in the video description below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.